Hello there. This is the second poem I'm doing today, really related to the army, because we're coming up to Remembrance Day and the 100th anniversary of First World War, the end of the First World War. It's called a Bogside Ballad. It's about, well, first of all, it's a free form sort of poem. I say sort of poem because it's for me it's more like a narrative than actual poetry, but that's another debate about the art form. This is really quite serious about the army. It was prompted, I remember, by one year when I think there was a play about horses in the First World War, and it just concerned me actually that we were spending so much time worrying about horses in the First World War, and we forget about sometimes the events that have happened recently, and in particular the troubles, so-called troubles in Ireland. We seem to refuse to regard it as a war. It's a civil war. It was a civil war, and certainly when I was there in 1973, shortly after Bloody Sunday, which of course was a disaster, we as a group of people that were unlikely to shoot anyone were sent to the Bogside, and we lost 3 dead and 5 shot. Fortunately not seriously shot, but the 3 dead were dead, and that was out of about 150, so it was fairly serious, and we returned 1 round. So in other words, having had to put up with being shot at every time we put our heads outside of the barracks. Well, actually we were stationed in what was called the Saracen factory. Every time we went out we were shot at. So for me it was very serious. I think most people would regard being shot at as relatively serious, but we don't seem to, in the UK, we don't seem to want to talk about that. We want to glorify people dying and in other circumstances, I fear. Let me get on with it. For those that have been in the army, hopefully it will, or the forces, let's say, it will bring back memories. For those that haven't, it's probably very difficult to imagine what those times were like. I was based in Germany. My unit was permanently based in Germany. We were facing the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. So to have to go to Ireland was actually a real pain. Separation from family, and actually a drop in pay, which was the subject of parliamentary debates. I think we eventually got some money for it, but we lost our local overseas allowance that we had when we were based in Germany, and of course it was on that our families were able to live. So when they sent us to Ireland for 4 months, or a bit more than 4 months, we didn't get paid, and that was a major source of complaint at the time. As I say, I can't remember exactly what the outcome was. Right, enough of that. A Bogside Ballad. They had trained so hard to foresee every event, military pragmatism, pretense of precision. On studio-made streets, hostile crowds played by soldiers within a purpose-built building in the German countryside. Flashes of light in this deliberate, desperate darkness, objects thrown and brutal, baffling noise. Helmets, perspex shields and baton rounds, riflemen behind pretending to identify snipers. This was simulation, though the injuries were real. Weeks later, their reality was in the Bogside, along grey streets of grim terraced houses, an atmosphere filled with fear and hatred. Well-trained yet surprised and unprepared, berries and redundant rifles replaced riot equipment. No permission was granted for baton rounds. They were there to search homes and keep a low profile. In the early hours of the morning, the crowd assembled. The banging of dustbin lids accompanied groans of over-armoured vehicles. Women on the front line shouted obscenities into the obscurity. But these sights and sounds were not simulated. These sticks and stones were meant to break bones. They had arrived in Ireland a few weeks earlier, direct from a military airfield by chartered plane, then by big green bus from Belfast, as if to advertise the presence of British soldiers, so vulnerable during that journey, first feelings of futility and fear. The unseen enemy was not foreign. Same language, same skin, same religion for many, same roads, same houses, same bleak 70s recession. The start of so many surreal juxtapositions. But that night, there was what can be called a riot, a special experience that confirmed the army's weakness. They could not search houses in riot gear, and there were not enough troops to do both. Among a population perhaps 100 times greater, and the hostile indistinguishable from the others. Bloody Sunday had shown the folly of treating this as a foreign war. This was a civil war. The army in support of the civil power, a power seen as corrupt, undemocratic, and vicious by many. A mother tried to snatch a rifle, strapped to a soldier's wrist. She received a blow from the unbound fist. Another, full of anger, spat at a fresh, fearful face, and, when pushed away, shouted of the disgrace. Arms were found, a few old rifles, a submachine gun, and ammunition. Some were arrested, many were injured. Soldiers that were not infantry were used as infantry. Infantrymen were kept away for fear they might do their jobs, as they had tried to do a few months before. An attempt to resolve a political problem by military force. Lives and liberties lost to sustain the unsustainable. Some who threw stones would later become political leaders. On Rossville Flats, there was an observation post. To keep one man on watch, it required 8 to guard him. 2 sat by the lift shaft at all times, relieved every 2 hours. And 2 NCOs managed the mission while the relief slept. One night, the 2 lift guards were shot dead from behind by freedom fighters from the fire escape. Afterwards, the access was blocked by an armoured panel. The stable door was closed after the horse had bolted. Few soldiers took the time to look at a large map wherein one could see the proximity of the border, as if the sight of the size of the task would sap the simple soldier's enthusiasm. A horse could reach safety in such a short time. On patrol, a sergeant knelt by a junction box to better hear the radio and catch his breath. His beret was found later on the branch of a tree, his body parts recovered in a black bag. The standby teams were sent in to arrest someone, anyone, in a show of strength. A bomb had exploded as another horse had bolted. Few have heard of the heroes of this conflict, the soldiers that risked life, limb, and legitimacy for a cause that had become void of substance, who had left their loved ones in real foreign lands, who had their pay reduced because they were returned to their own country, who had never joined the army to be in the infantry, who thought the enemy was the Warsaw Pact. This was not glorious active service against a tyranny or religious extremists. This was deadly public service, meriting a mere medal and a mauve and green ribbon, and a few lines in the local newspapers. We remember the fallen in great foreign wars, and the horses that suffered with them, but seldom those that bolted after closed doors, and the victims of that military mayhem. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.